In a military armory, a four-star general stops cold when he sees a quiet staff sergeant wearing a badge marked with one impossible number: 3,200 meters. No one around her understands who Mara Knox really is, why her record is buried under layers of redaction, or how many lives depend on the shots only she can make. What starts as a routine inspection becomes the unveiling of a soldier the military can no longer keep hidden.
He was a general who thought he had seen it all. He had witnessed wars, medals, heroes, and liars, but he had never seen this number before. 3,200 meters, a confirmed kill. He froze right where he stood. The armory became completely quiet. Every officer felt the shift. This was no longer a routine inspection, it was something more. That kind of distance was not in any record book. It should not be possible for a person with a rifle, and yet there it was, on a soldier no one had ever paid attention to before. If you want to see how the impossible became reality, stay with me. Like this video and comment with your city to show me how far this story has traveled. The air in the main armory at Ironcliff Base tasted like gun oil and steel. It was 0600 hours, and the buzzing fluorescent lights cast a cold, white glare on everything. This harsh light made all the shadows appear unnaturally sharp. Racks of weapons stood in neat rows along the walls. There were M4s, M240s, grenade launchers, and heavy rifles locked behind strong glass. Every item had its own specific place. Every item had a clear purpose, and all of it was ready for inspection. General Richard Hale moved with the air of a man who was no longer easily impressed. He had 4 stars on his shoulder and 32 years of service. He had seen armies in Kandahar, Ramani, Seoul, and other places you will not find on a map. He had a gift for seeing through people. He could spot dedication, and he could spot laziness. More importantly, he always knew when someone had a secret to keep. His assistant, Captain Morris, followed him closely, holding a tablet and checking off items with robotic precision. Morris was a capable and unremarkable young officer. He was the type who kept the system running smoothly without ever asking why it existed. "The inventory is perfect, sir," Morris reported in a low voice. "Nothing has changed since last month." Hale offered no reply. His eyes were already sweeping across the rows of equipment. He scanned everything like a man trained to find the single flaw in a perfect design. He was looking for the one small thing that was out of place. The soldiers stood perfectly still at their posts. Most were skilled armorers who understood weapons better than the infantry officers who used them. They stared straight ahead, their shoulders back and their breathing steady, just as they were trained. Hale walked past the first row of soldiers, and then the second, saying nothing. The sound of his boots echoed on the hard floor, each footstep slow and purposeful. That is when he noticed her. She was in the back corner, next to the heavy weapons. She knelt beside a powerful rifle that had been taken apart. It was a Barrett M82A1, a 50 caliber weapon that weighed 30 pounds and could destroy an engine from a mile away. It was the kind of gun that made enemies nervous and made friendly soldiers very sore. She was working in a quiet and orderly way. Her hands moved with a confidence that comes only from endless practice. The bolt carrier group, the barrel, and the recoil spring. Every part was arranged perfectly on a clean mat. There was no wasted movement and no sign of doubt. Hale barely looked at her. He thought she was just another technician performing her duties. Nothing seemed strange. He continued walking, but a small detail bothered him. It was like a flicker of movement you see from the corner of your eye. It was like a sound that does not fit its surroundings. He paused and turned around. The soldier was still on her knees, now using a special wrench on the rifle. Her face was calm and concentrated. She had on a standard uniform, with her hair in a neat bun. She wore no makeup or jewelry. She was following regulations and looked completely ordinary, except for one thing, the badge. It was a small, simple patch, pinned just below her unit insignia. Most people would not have seen it. Even if they did, they would not have understood its meaning. But Hale saw it. He walked closer, his eyes focused. The badge was a flat black color with a single line of text. It read, 3,200 meters, confirmed. For 3 long seconds, Hale simply stopped breathing. He read the words a second time, and then a third. He hoped the numbers would change into something that made sense. 3,200 meters. That was almost 2 miles. The longest confirmed shot in military history was 3,540 meters. It was made by a Canadian Special Forces soldier. That happened in 2017 in Iraq. It required a team of spotters, ideal weather, and a shot that experts still argue about. They say it was part skill and part luck. And this soldier, a staff sergeant, wore a badge for a shot that was only 340 meters short of that record. Hale's jaw became tense. Soldier. His voice was sharp and clear. The woman raised her head. Her eyes were a calm shade of gray. She did not seem startled. She did not even stand up. She just looked at him with a quiet stillness. "Sir," she replied. Her voice was flat, without any fear. Hale pointed to the badge. "Tell me about that." She looked at her sleeve and then back at him. "It is a marksmanship badge, sir. It is for a confirmed shot at a great distance." "I am aware of what it is," Hale said, his voice quiet but intense. "I am asking why you have it." The room was now completely silent. Every technician and officer was now focused on them. Morris was frozen in place, his pen still held above the tablet's screen. The woman put her wrench down carefully on the mat. "I earned it, sir." Hale could feel his heart beat faster, not with anger, but with pure disbelief. That distance is not in any training guide. It is not part of our official methods. It is barely possible. "With all due respect, sir," she said, her voice remaining firm. "It is in the record." "Whose record?" "Mine." There was complete silence. Hale stared at her, and she stared right back. She showed no defiance or pride. She was simply stating a fact. Morris cleared his throat. "Sir, should I check her file?" Hale replied, without taking his eyes off the soldier. Immediately, Morris's fingers tapped quickly on the tablet. After a moment, his face lost all its color. "Sir, it is restricted." Hale turned to him quickly. "What do you mean?" "Her service record. I can see the basic information, but most of it is blacked out. I would need a much higher security clearance to see more." Hale's eyes narrowed. He looked back at the soldier. "What is your name?" "Staff Sergeant Mara Knox, sir." "How long have you been stationed at Ironcliff?" 8 months, sir." "And where were you before that?" There was a small pause, just long enough to be significant. "I was on deployment, sir. The details are classified." Hale felt a change in the atmosphere. It was a quiet shift, like the calm just before a major storm begins. He took a step closer and spoke in a lower voice. "I have worn this uniform for more years than you have been alive. I have seen the secret files of top operators and special assets that most colonels do not even know about. And none of them had a badge like yours." Mara did not even blink. "Then perhaps you have not seen the right files, sir." The air in the room felt thick enough to cut. Morris made a small sound that was a mix of a cough and a gasp. Another technician moved slightly, and his boots scraped the concrete floor. Hale held her gaze for 5 more seconds. Then he stood up straight, turned, and walked toward the door. "Morris, meet me in the conference room in 10 minutes." "Yes, sir." When Hale walked out of the armory, the bright sunlight felt like a physical blow. He stood on the steps, taking deep breaths of the cold air. He tried to ignore the strange feeling that was growing inside him. Impossible. That was the only word for the badge. It was impossible. But Mara Knox did not look like she was telling a lie. She looked like she was stating a simple fact, and that was far more disturbing. 10 minutes later, Hale was sitting by himself in a conference room. He stared at a tablet that was not giving him the answers he wanted. Morris had gathered all the available information on Staff Sergeant Mara Knox. It was not very much. Name, Knox, Mara J. Rank, E6, Staff Sergeant. MOS 11B, Infantry. Additional skill, B4, Sniper. Her current job was at Iron Cliff Base, in Armory Operations. Her previous jobs were blacked out. Her deployments were blacked out. Her awards were blacked out. The only clear information was simple. She was 29 years old. Her hometown was Billings, Montana. She had joined the Army 11 years ago. Everything else, all the important parts, were hidden behind security measures that Hale could not bypass. This did not make any sense. He was a 4-star general. Only a handful of people in the entire military had more authority than he did. And yet, he was looking at a file that treated him like an ordinary citizen. Morris stood by the door, looking very nervous. "Sir, I have put in a request to get access, but it will take some time." "How much time?" "It could be hours, or it could be days. It all depends on who has to approve it." Hale placed the tablet on the table. "Tell me everything you can see." Morris paused for a moment and then looked at the limited information. She joined the Army at 18. She finished basic training at Fort Benning at the top of her class. She was then chosen for advanced infantry training. After that, the information becomes unclear. There is a 6-month period where her status is listed as in training, but with no location and no other details. It was probably sniper school, but not the usual one. Whatever she did, it was not the standard Fort Benning program. Hale leaned back in his chair. What about her scores on the shooting range? Morris tapped on the screen. That is one of the strange parts. Explain strange. Her rifle qualification scores are all marked as exempt. Exempt? Yes, sir. It does not say she failed or passed, just exempt. It is as if the test was not required for her. Hale felt his jaw clench. Continue. After that training period, she appears in a unit with a name I have never seen before. Task Force Mongoose. There is no base listed and no command structure. There is only the name. Mongoose. Hale said to himself. He had heard that name once, many years ago. It was during a briefing about special operations in the Hindu Kush Mountains. They mentioned secret teams that handled missions too sensitive for regular soldiers. He had thought it was just a rumor. Morris went on. She was a part of that unit for 4 years, and then she was sent here. There is no reason given, no notes about the transfer. She was just assigned to the armory as if she were coming from a simple office job. Hale got up and began to walk toward the window. Outside, the base was coming to life. Soldiers were jogging in formation, and vehicles were heading to the motor pool. Everything looked normal, but nothing about Mara Knox was ordinary. "Get me the range logs," Hale ordered. He wanted to see all her records, from live fire to simple training. Morris turned and left the room. Hale remained by the window, watching the morning sun rise. He thought about the look in Mara's eyes. It was not fear or pride, but pure confidence. She looked like someone who had nothing left to prove. It was strange. By 400 hours, Hale had the files. The logs were almost empty. Mara Knox hardly ever used the training grounds. When she did, her targets were set at incredible distances. 800 meters, 1,000, even 1,200, and every single shot was marked as a direct hit. Not just on target, but a perfect hit to the center each time. Hale sat in his office, reading the data. The weight of the information felt heavy in his chest. A knock came at the door. "Come in." Morris entered, with another officer Hale had never seen before. The man was older, with a quiet demeanor, like he had been called out of retirement. "Sir," Morris began, "this is Colonel Greer from JSOC. He asked for a meeting. Hale stood up. Colonel. Greer gave a slight nod. General. I hear you've been looking into one of my old operators. Hale's focus sharpened. Your operator? Greer clarified. She is currently assigned to Ironcliff, officially working in armory support. Unofficially, she is on standby. For what? Greer offered a small smile. For missions that require someone who can do the impossible. Hale crossed his arms. That badge, the 3,200-meter shot, is it authentic? Greer's smile vanished. It is authentic. How? That information is classified, Greer said slowly. But I will tell you this. Mara Knox is the most accurate long-range shooter I have ever known, perhaps the best in the world. And if you plan on using her for a publicity stunt, I strongly advise against it. Why is that? Because she does not perform for an audience. She performs when people's lives are at stake. If you put her in the spotlight, you will lose a unique asset who succeeds because nobody is watching her. Hale felt the impact of those words. She is being wasted in an armory. Is she? Greer tilted his head. Or is she right where she needs to be until she is needed again? The room was silent. Greer walked to the door, then stopped. One last thing, General. The shot that earned her that badge was not a training exercise. It was a real operation. A high-value target. Hostages, no air support, and no backup. It was just her, a rifle, and 4 hours to calculate an impossible shot. Hale's breath caught. One shot, one kill. 32 hostages came home safe. Greer departed. Hale stood staring at the empty doorway, a new feeling growing in his chest. It was not doubt or disbelief. It was understanding. That evening, Hale went back to the armory. It was much quieter, as most technicians had gone home. Only a few were left, finishing their reports and securing equipment. Mara was still there. She was in the same corner, with the same rifle, working with her usual focus. Hale approached her slowly, with his hands clasped behind his back. She glanced up when he was 10 feet away. General, Knox. He stopped near her workspace. I had a talk with Colonel Greer. She gave a single nod, showing no reaction. He told me about the shot. She nodded again. Why did you not say anything? Hale asked. When I questioned you, you could have explained it. You could have defended yourself. Mara put down her cleaning rod. Respectfully, sir, I did not need to. The badge is authentic. The record is authentic. Whether you believed it or not does not change the facts. Hale felt a mix of respect and maybe a little irritation. Most soldiers would have seized the opportunity to prove their skill, he said. I am not most soldiers. No, Hale quietly agreed. You are not. He watched her work for a moment. Her rifle shined under the armory lights. Every part was clean, every piece double-checked. How do you make a shot like that? He asked. 2 miles. With wind, bullet spin, and the Earth's rotation. How do you manage all of that? Mara looked up at him. For the first time, her expression changed slightly. It was not a smile, but a look of pure honesty. You do not rush, she said. You do not guess. You calculate and you wait. And when the right moment arrives, you trust the work you have already done. Hale nodded slowly. And if you miss, then someone dies who should not have. The seriousness of her words filled the space between them. Hale started to leave, but then he paused. Knox, sir, do not let them hide you away in this armory. You are capable of more than this. She tilted her head slightly. With all due respect, sir, I am right where I am supposed to be. Hale observed her for a moment longer, then he left. As the door shut, Mara returned to her rifle. She was steady, precise, and unseen, just how she preferred it. About 3 days later, an official message arrived, but it felt wrong. Hale read it 2 times before calling Morris to his office. Sir, they are pulling Knox for a live demonstration, Hale said, his voice tense. Some VIP tour group wants to see our top marksman in action. They want her on the range tomorrow at 900 hours. Morris looked concerned. That is highly unusual. It is foolish, Hale snapped. She is not some circus performer. Do you want me to object, sir? Hale thought about it, then shook his head. No, let it proceed. Morris was surprised. Sir, if they want to see her skill, then let them. Perhaps then they will realize why we do not show her off like a prize. Morris left, still looking puzzled. Hale leaned back, staring at the ceiling. He suspected that the next day was going to be very interesting. The next morning, the Iron Cliff extended range stretched 3 miles into the desert. Flags marked every 100 meters. Earthen mounds rose and fell like waves of dirt. At the very end, barely visible, were steel targets shaped like people. The VIP group showed up at 8:45. It included congressmen, defense contractors, and a few journalists with cameras. They gathered on the observation platform, speaking quietly and drinking coffee. Hale stood to the side with his arms crossed, watching everything. Mara came at 8:55, carrying her rifle case. She wore her standard uniform, her hair tied back, and her face was neutral. She ignored the crowd completely. She placed the case on the ground, opened it, and started to assemble her rifle. She moved with the same calm focus Hale had seen in the armory. A congressman came over to Hale. Is that her? Yes, it is. She does not look like much. Hale did not answer. The range officer, a master sergeant with 30 years of service, came forward. Sergeant Knox, you are cleared for the demonstration. Targets are at 800, 1,000, and 1,200 meters. The wind is 3 knots from the northwest. Air pressure is stable. The range is yours. Mara nodded. Understood. She walked to the shooting platform, got into a prone position, and looked through her scope. The rifle seemed huge compared to her, but she handled it effortlessly. Hale noticed her breathing become slower. He watched as a deep stillness came over her entire body. Several minutes went by. The VIPs grew restless. One of them whispered something to another, who then checked his watch. Then, a loud boom echoed across the valley. The rifle's blast kicked up a cloud of dust. Mara absorbed the recoil without moving at all. Stand by, the range officer said, looking through his binoculars. 3 seconds. Impact at 800 meters. Center mass. The VIPs gave polite applause. A contractor nodded his head in approval. Hale showed no reaction. Mara pulled the bolt, loaded another round, and got back into position. Another minute passed in total silence. Boom. Impact. 1,000 meters. Center mass. This time there was more applause and a few impressed comments. Mara paid them no attention. She was already adjusting her scope, thinking through new calculations, and breathing with the wind. This time, she took much longer. 5 minutes passed. The VIPs began to get impatient. A journalist said something to his cameraman. Hale's jaw grew tight. He thought, just wait. Boom. This shot sounded different, more powerful and heavy. The valley seemed to absorb the sound. Everyone leaned in to see. The range officer raised his binoculars and frowned. He adjusted the focus. Then, his voice came out flat with disbelief. Impact. 1,200 meters. Dead center. Within 2 inches of the kill zone. There was complete silence. Then, one person began to clap. The others joined in, first uncertainly, and then with more energy. Mara stood up, removed the used cartridge, and began to take her rifle apart. One of the congressmen walked up to Hale. That was remarkable, General. Truly. But I expected to see something closer to her record. The 3,200-meter shot. Hale looked at him with a hard expression. You just saw it. I am sorry? She shot at 1,200 meters, because that is the maximum length of this range. But the precision, the consistency, the patience, and the control are the same at any distance. If you want to see 3,200 meters, build me a longer range and give her a target that is worth hitting." The congressman was speechless. "I understand." Hale walked off, leaving the VIPs behind. He found Mara by the equipment shed, putting her rifle case away. "Knox." She looked up. "Sir, how did you feel about that?" "About what, sir?" "Being shown off like that." She shrugged her shoulders. "It is sometimes part of the job. It should not be." Mara looked him in the eye. "Respectfully, sir, I did not mind. They needed a lesson in what discipline looks like. Now they know." Hale looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded. Dismissed. She turned and headed for the motor pool, her rifle case over her shoulder. She moved with the same quiet focus that defined her. Hale watched her leave, and for the first time in a very long time, he felt something like hope. The world was filled with noise and people who needed attention, but she was different. But that was not Mara Knox's way. All she ever needed was a rifle, a target, and a good reason. When the time for the impossible arrived, she would be prepared, silent, and invisible until the last second. That evening, General Hale reviewed the demonstration reports in his quarters. The distinguished guests were very impressed. The military contractors were asking for more data. Reporters were already writing stories about the ghost sniper nobody had heard of. He put the file down and looked at the wall. Somewhere on the base, Mara Knox was likely cleaning her rifle again, just as she did every night. It was a slow, careful, and perfect process, and she would do it again tomorrow, and she would repeat it the day after, until she was called. Hale rested back in his chair, his gaze shifting to the window. The base lights pushed back against the encroaching darkness, and out there in the night, a soldier no one ever saw was defending the line. Some heroes do not need recognition to change the world. They just have to be prepared when the world calls on them. The call for her arrived 3 weeks later, and it was not through normal channels. Hale was in his office looking over supply requests when the secure phone began to ring. It was not his desk phone, but the black one. That phone only rang when a situation had gone terribly wrong and needed his personal involvement. He answered it before the third ring. "Hale." The voice on the line was sharp, professional, and strange. "General, this is Major Vance from Joint Special Operations, Command Operations. A situation is unfolding that demands your personal attention. Can you please confirm your line is secure?" Hale looked at his closed and locked office door. "Confirmed. What is the situation?" "We require Staff Sergeant Knox immediately." Hale could feel his heart beat faster. "Explain. A hostage crisis is in progress. It involves embassy, staff, and high-value individuals. The window for a tactical response is getting smaller. We must have her unique skills on location within 6 hours, where that information is classified until she is briefed. Can you authorize her release?" Hale's jaw clenched. "She is not an asset I can simply release. She is currently assigned to Armory Operations." "General," Vance's tone grew colder. "We are both aware that is just an administrative cover. Colonel Greer noted she was available for an instant recall. We are using that option right now." Hale got up and walked toward the window. Outside, the base moved with its usual rhythm. Physical training groups, vehicle repairs, the entire machine of daily routine. What is the threat? Armed militants in a defended location with civilians in direct peril. A traditional attack would risk too many casualties. We require precision. We require distance. We require Knox. Hale shut his eyes. She is not some piece of equipment you take from a shelf when you need it. No, sir. She is a specialist. We call on her when people's lives are at risk. And at this moment, 12 lives are at risk. So I will ask you one more time, can you release her? A long silence passed between them. Then Hale answered in a low voice. I will send her to your location. But Vance, sir, if you do not bring her back safe, you will have to answer to me. I understand, General. The call ended. Hale stood for a second, looking at the phone, the responsibility of his choice weighing on him. He then picked up his hat and went to the door. He found Mara right where he knew she would be, cleaning her rifle in the armory. She glanced up as he came in, understanding his look in a single moment, her hands never stopping their work. Sir, get your equipment ready, Hale ordered. You leave in 90 minutes. Mara did not ask for details or show any surprise. She simply gave a single nod and started to pack her weapon with fast, expert motions. The mission length is not known. It could be days or it could be hours. You will be briefed on the rules of engagement while you travel. She got to her feet, put her rifle case on one shoulder, and took her gear bag with her other hand. Her face showed no emotion, but Hale noticed something in her eyes. It was not fear or excitement. It was focus. The kind of focus that appears when the situation is critical and there is no space for a mistake. Knocks. She paused at the door and turned back. Hale wanted to say more, to tell her to be safe, to return unharmed, to remind her she was more than just her skill, but he could not find the words. Mara Knox did not want comfort. She wanted him to trust her. Make it count, was all he said. She looked him in the eye for a brief moment, and then she was gone. Hale remained alone in the armory, hearing her footsteps disappear down the hall as a deep silence surrounded him. The briefing took place on a C-130 flying high above the Atlantic. Mara was in the cargo area, with tactical maps, satellite photos, and 3 officers who appeared to have not slept for several days. Major Vance, a lean man in his mid-40s with sharp eyes, conducted the briefing. With him was Captain Reyes, a logistics expert with a tablet showing live intelligence, and Lieutenant Samuels, a young forward observer who stared at Mara as if she were a legend brought to life. Vance got straight to the point. 12 hours ago, the United States Embassy in Karzan was attacked by a militant faction known as the Red Crescent Brigade. They are holding 16 hostages, including our ambassador, 2 Central Intelligence Agency officers, and 11 local employees. He touched the tablet, and an overhead map of the embassy appeared on a screen in the cargo area. The structure was on a hill above the city, protected by tall walls, guard towers, and a single road that wound up from the valley. The militants are well positioned, Vance explained. They have blocked the main entrance, placed mines on the road, and have snipers in the towers. Any normal attack would cause many deaths, for them and for us. Mara examined the map, her eyes following the angles, lines of sight, and blind spots. What are they demanding? The release of 30 prisoners from government prisons. The deadline is in 36 hours. After that time passes, they will begin to eliminate the hostages, 1 person every hour. Samuels moved in his seat, looking worried. We have attempted to negotiate. They are not willing to talk. Mara's eyes stayed fixed on the screen. Air support is not an option. Vance said there is too great a risk of harm to others. The hostages are in different locations in the building. A single mistake could cost us everyone. A ground attack has the same issue. The only way in is a death trap. We would lose many soldiers just getting to the front gate. Mara leaned closer, examining the landscape. So, you require someone to take out the leader without starting a massive fight. Precisely. Vance looked directly at her. We have identified their commander, a man named Tariq al-Hazam, a former soldier who was both clever and brutal. He is running the operation from the secure conference room on the 3rd floor of the embassy. If we eliminate him, their command will fall apart. His deputies will panic, and our quick reaction force can enter during the chaos. Where is the conference room? Reyes displayed a new image, which was a floor plan. It is on the northeast corner of the 3rd floor, with windows that look out on the valley. Mara's eyes measured the span from the embassy to the nearby ridges, the range. Vance's face grew stern. 2,800 meters, approximately. The only sound in the cargo area was the steady hum of the engines. Samuels was the first to speak. That is, nearly 2 miles. Mara showed no emotion. She continued to analyze the landscape, mentally calculating wind speed, altitude differences, and heat waves. What is the weather report? Reyes looked at his tablet. The winds are unstable, with gusts up to 15 knots. The temperature will fall after the sun sets. The humidity is rising. When do I engage? That is your decision, Vance replied. But the clock is running. The longer this takes, the more dangerous the situation will become. Mara leaned back, her focus still on the map. Her brain was already processing all the factors: the bullet's path, the air conditions, the human elements. 2,800 meters with shifting winds and city heat, with the lives of hostages on the line. This was a shot that most snipers would never even consider. She looked at Vance. I need a spotter, someone familiar with the area. Samuels will act as your forward observer. He has been in that region for 6 months. Mara looked at the lieutenant. He seemed very young, but his eyes were calm and he met her gaze without looking away. That was a good sign. What are the rules of engagement? She asked. You must have a positive identification on Al-Hazam. Confirm he is by himself. 1 shot, a clean elimination. There is no possibility of error. Mara nodded her head slowly. And if I do not succeed, Vance's expression was like stone. Then 16 people will perish, and we will return with body bags instead of heroes. The seriousness of his words filled the cargo area. Mara stood up, putting her rifle case on her shoulder. When do we land? You will touch down in 4 hours. You have until sunrise to get into position. The first light is your opportunity. She started to walk to the back of the airplane, but then she paused. Major. Yes, if this does not go as planned, please make sure they know it was not for a lack of trying. Vance's hard expression eased slightly. It will not fail, Sergeant. That is the reason you are here. Mara did not say anything more. She just walked to the back of the plane, took a seat, and shut her eyes. Samuels observed her, then spoke quietly to Reyes. Is she always this composed? Reyes answered without taking his eyes off his tablet. She is not composed, Lieutenant. She is concentrating. The shot is already being made in her mind. She is simply waiting for the real world to align with it. Done. They touched down after midnight at a remote forward operating base. The dry air was thick with the grit of dust and diesel fuel. Only 20 personnel worked at the small outpost, focused on logistics and intelligence. No one spoke to her. No one even met her eyes. They understood Mara's purpose there and knew to give her space. Samuels waited by the Humvee, shouldering a heavy pack of observation and communication equipment. He looked tense but ready. He told her they had a hiding spot prepared as they drove off. It was on a ridgeline overlooking the valley, offering excellent cover and a clear shot to the embassy. Mara simply nodded, inspecting her rifle for the 3rd time. Every part was perfect. The barrel was clean, the scope was aligned, and the .50 caliber ammunition was hand-selected for consistency. The journey took 40 minutes, along twisting roads that passed through deserted towns. The headlights sliced through the blackness, lighting up decaying walls and hollow windows. This land was fought over constantly. While government troops owned the roads, the hills were held by those willing to fight and die for them. They got to the drop-off point just before 2 in the morning. Mara and Samuels got out and started walking across the rocky ground, making their way up to the ridge. The night was cold and so quiet it felt heavy, making every single breath and footstep seem incredibly loud. 40 minutes later, they arrived at the hideout, a small dip in the earth concealed by a rock formation and expertly camouflaged. From their perch, the valley unfolded beneath them like a giant map. In the distance, The embassy compound sat illuminated by bright floodlights and secured by high walls. Mara smoothly assembled her rifle and settled into her shooting position. Samuels configured the spotting scope, carefully adjusting its stand and position. "The distance is 2,820 meters, he said in a low voice. Wind is from the northwest at 8 to 12 knots. Barometric pressure is 30.1 and falling." Mara gave no reply. She was already peering through her scope, examining the embassy. She looked for any sign of movement, for daily routines, for the single clue she needed to achieve her mission. The hours crept by. The sky slowly changed from black to a deep blue, and then to a soft gray. The city below began to wake up. Faint sounds of cars, people talking, and the call to prayer drifted up from a nearby tower. Samuels moved slightly next to her. "How much longer do we wait?" "Until the opportunity appears," Mara answered, her voice a faint whisper. "And if it does not appear, then we continue to wait." Samuels became quiet again. Mara's breathing deepened and her heart rate slowed. She focused her entire world into the small circle of her scope, watching the embassy, its windows, and the play of light and shadow. At 6:27 in the morning, she saw it, movement on the third floor, in the northeast corner. A person appeared in a window, their shape outlined by the lights inside. The person was tall and had broad shoulders, and was holding a small object. It might have been a phone or a communications device. Samuels focused his own scope. "That could be our target. We need to confirm the identity." Mara zoomed her scope in, getting a closer look. The figure turned, and for a brief second his face was perfectly clear. He had a dark beard, a scar down his left cheek, and eyes that surveyed the room with pure authority. "That is him," Samuels whispered. "That is Al-Hazam." Mara's heart rate remained steady. She was already factoring in the wind, the altitude, and the air temperature. The bullet would fall almost 30 feet and curve to the left over that vast distance. It would lose speed and stability. She would only have one attempt. Samuels's voice was firm now. "The wind is holding at 10 knots. The pressure is steady, and you have a clear shot." Mara breathed out slowly, releasing half the air in her lungs and holding the rest. Her finger gently touched the trigger, not squeezing, just waiting for the right moment. Al-Hazam walked to the window and gazed out at the valley. He was talking to someone out of sight, gesturing with his hands, full of confidence and feeling secure. He was completely unaware that death was observing him from 2 miles away. Mara felt the perfect moment arrive. It was not a conscious choice, but a pure instinct. The wind died down. The light became perfect. Everything was aligned. She squeezed the trigger. The rifle exploded with a deafening roar. Samuels whispered the count. 3, 4, 5. Mara watched through her scope. The bullet was traveling at 2,800 feet per second, but it seemed to move in slow motion across the huge distance. It felt like the entire world was waiting. Then, the glass of the window shattered. Al-Hazam's head jerked backward. His body fell from sight. Samuels let out a sharp breath. "A hit. We have a confirmed hit. Target is down." Mara smoothly reloaded her rifle, but did not fire again. She just kept watching. Inside the embassy, chaos broke out. People were running past the windows. The sounds of shouting carried faintly across the valley. Their leadership was falling apart, exactly as Vance had predicted. Samuels spoke into his radio. "Command, this is Overwatch. The target has been neutralized. I repeat, the target has been neutralized. The quick reaction force can now advance." The reply came back instantly. "Overwatch, we copy. The quick reaction force is on its way. Wait for our signal." Mara lowered her weapon and finally let out a long breath. It felt like she had been holding it for hours. Her hands were firm and her breathing was even, but a knot of tension inside her finally began to loosen. Samuel stared at her with wide eyes, That was amazing. I've never seen a shot like that. Mara did not answer him. She was already disassembling her rifle and packing her bag. She had to be ready to leave because making the shot was only the start. Now, they had to escape. Their pickup was supposed to be simple and quiet. They moved carefully along the mountain ridge, following the same path they took to get there. They headed for the spot where the Humvee was waiting. The sun was just beginning to appear, covering the valley in warm shades of orange and yellow. It was a beautiful sight, if you could ignore the sounds of fighting from the embassy as the rescue team broke in. Samuels was in the lead, looking at his global positioning system to keep them on the right path. Mara was right behind him with her rifle ready. She scanned the area for any sign of danger, for anything that seemed wrong. They were about halfway to the Humvee when Samuels suddenly stopped. "We have company," he whispered as he dropped to one knee. Mara got down next to him and looked where he was pointing. 3 people were about 400 meters away, moving in the same direction. They were likely armed locals who heard the shot and came to see what was happening. Samuels raised his radio to his mouth to call his commander. "We have encountered potential hostiles on our escape route. We need an immediate pickup." There was only static, then a strained voice came through. "Negative, Overwatch. Our quick reaction force is in a firefight. All aircraft are currently engaged. You will be on your own for the next 30 minutes. Samuels muttered a curse. Mara watched the armed men get closer. They had not been seen yet, but it was only a matter of time. The landscape had very little cover, and the rising sun was quickly burning away all the shadows. "We cannot stay here," she said calmly. "What is your plan?" Mara analyzed the situation, calculating the angles, distances, and timing. "We move quickly. We stay low. If they open fire, we return fire and move to a new position. And if they have backup, then we will have to adapt," she replied. Samuel took a deep breath and then nodded. "You lead the way." They moved crouched down and fast, using the rocks and sparse bushes for concealment, trying to create distance from the approaching fighters. Mara's breathing was even, her movements smooth and efficient. This was not her area of expertise. Escaping on foot required a different set of skills than long-distance shooting, but her training had prepared her for it. She had survived far worse situations. From behind, she heard shouting. The fighters had noticed something. It might have been their footprints or a glimpse of movement. Whatever it was, their time was running out. Mara and Samuels found a shallow, dry riverbed that cut through the landscape. They jumped down into it, using the banks as cover, and followed it toward their extraction point. Bullets suddenly cracked through the air behind them. The rounds zipped over their heads, kicking up clouds of dirt and chips of rock. Samuels flinched but kept on moving. Mara did not even hesitate. She was counting the shots. They were from automatic rifles, fired by 3 people. It was suppressive fire, meant to pin them down rather than hit them directly. "Keep moving!" Mara yelled. They ran. The riverbed curved up ahead, which would give them a moment of cover. Mara risked a quick look behind her. The fighters were closer now, maybe 200 meters away, and moving like they knew they had the upper hand. They were mistaken. Mara dropped to one knee, raised her rifle, and aimed in one fluid motion. Samuels, realizing she had stopped, turned back. "What are you doing?" "Get to the vehicle," Mara commanded, her voice steady. "Radio for an immediate pickup. I will give you some time. I am not going to leave you." "That is an order, Lieutenant," she said firmly. Their eyes locked for a moment. Samuels saw something in her expression. It was not fear or desperation, but absolute resolve from someone who had already accepted the outcome. He paused for just a second longer, and then he ran. Mara turned her attention back to the fighters. 3 of them were now moving quickly to close the gap. She got into a stable firing position, slowed her breathing, and narrowed her focus. This was not a shot from a mile away. This was about the basics: breath control, trigger squeeze, and follow-through. The first fighter appeared over the ridge. Mara fired. The massive .50 caliber bullet struck him in the chest. The force of the impact sent him flying backward as if he had been hit by a truck. He did not move again. The other two men immediately dove for cover, yelling and firing wildly. Mara reloaded her rifle with another round and waited. The seconds felt like minutes. Then, one of the men broke from cover, trying to get to a better flanking position. Mara tracked him through her scope, led him slightly, and fired. He fell to the ground. The third fighter stayed put. He was smart. He knew he was trapped. Mara spoke into her radio. "Samuels, what is your status? I am at the vehicle. The extraction team is on its way. Estimated time of arrival is 10 minutes. 10 minutes. Mara knew she could hold out for 10 minutes. She settled into her position, her rifle firm, her eyes searching for any movement. The last fighter remained hidden, firing occasional bursts of gunfire in her direction, but his shots were inaccurate. Time moved slowly. It took 8 minutes. Then she finally heard the sound she was waiting for. It was the soft chopping of helicopter blades, coming in low and fast to get them out. Mara fired another shot to keep the enemy down. Then she got up and ran. She reached the pickup spot in less than 2 minutes, her lungs on fire and her legs aching. The escape vehicle was already rolling with Samuels behind the wheel, speeding toward the landing area. The helicopter landed in a storm of dust and noise. Mara jumped inside, and Samuels was right behind her. The pilot did not waste a second. He pulled the helicopter up and banked sharply away from the mountain ridge. Through the open door, Mara watched the valley shrink below, the embassy now just a tiny shape with smoke rising from it. Samuels leaned back against the wall, breathing heavily. He said, "That was way too close." Mara did not answer him. She was already checking her rifle, going through a mental list of what to do after a fight. She checked her weapon, counted her bullets, and made sure all her gear was there. Everything was as it should be. The pilot's voice came over the headset. "This is Griffin 1. The hostages are safe. We have all 16 of them. The mission was a success. That was some great shooting." Mara closed her eyes. 16 lives saved by one single shot. The numbers were simple, but the feeling was heavy. Samuels looked at her with pure amazement. "How do you do that? How do you stay so calm?" "I really thought we were going to die." Mara opened her eyes and looked out at the sky. "Being scared does not change what happens," she said. "Training changes what happens. Discipline changes what happens. The bullet does not care if you are afraid. It only cares if you are ready." Samuels nodded his head slowly, thinking about her words. The helicopter turned toward their base, leaving the valley far behind. Inside the noisy, vibrating helicopter, Mara sat in silence. She was already starting to let go of the shot, the fear, and the whole moment. Because in 6 hours, she would be back at the Ironcliff base, back in the weapons room, and back to being completely invisible. And that was exactly how it was supposed to be. The mission report took 3 hours, and when it was done, all Mara wanted was quiet. They had landed at the forward operating base in the afternoon. Major Vance pulled her into a tent that smelled of old coffee and stress before the helicopter blades even stopped spinning. There were maps on every table. Intelligence officers were gathered around screens, watching live video from the embassy. The hostages were all safe. All 16 had been rescued without a single injury. The enemy leader, Al-Hazam, was confirmed to be gone. His fighters had run into the hills, lost and without a leader. It was a complete success, but Vance wanted to know everything. He wanted every little detail, every thought, every single breath she took before she pulled the trigger. Mara told him exactly what he needed to know. She spoke about the wind speed, the air pressure, and all the technical details of delivering death from 2 miles away. She spoke with no emotion and no pride, just stating facts like she was reading from a repair manual. When she finished, Vance leaned back in his chair. He looked at her with a mix of respect and something deeper, something more serious. "Sergeant," he said softly, "what you did today. Most snipers go their whole careers and never make a shot like that. You made it look like it was easy." Mara did not say anything. Vance kept speaking. "The top command wants to recognize you for this publicly. They are talking about a medal. Maybe even more." "No." The word came out of her mouth, flat and final. Vance blinked, surprised. "Sergeant? With all due respect, sir. No. I was just doing my job. The hostages are safe. That is the only reward that I need." Vance watched her for a long moment. Then he nodded his head slowly. "All right. But this is going in your permanent record. When they write the history books, your name will be in them, whether you like it or not." Mara stood up and put her rifle case over her shoulder. "History can wait, sir. I would like to go home." 6 hours later, she was on a transport plane back to Ironcliff. She arrived at the base at 4 a.m, slipping through the gates in the dark like a ghost, returning to a place she knew well. There was no celebration, no one to welcome her back. It was just the guard at the gate who checked her identification and waved her through. Mara drove right to the armory. The building was empty and quiet, with only the low hum of the air system. She went to her usual spot in the corner, put down her rifle case, and started the ritual she had done 1,000 times. She took the rifle apart, inspected it, and cleaned it. She looked at every single piece, wiped every surface, and checked for any possible problems. Her hands moved on their own, but her mind was somewhere else. 2,800 meters. 1 shot, 16 lives. The numbers were important. They always were. But the weight of those numbers, knowing that if she had hesitated, there would be terrible sadness instead of happy reunions, that weight never got any lighter. It just became a familiar burden. She was putting the rifle back together when she heard footsteps. General Hale was standing in the doorway. His uniform was wrinkled, and he looked like he had not slept in days. "Knox." She looked up at him but did not get up. "Sir." Hale walked toward her slowly, with his hands behind his back. "I read the report about an hour ago. Vance said you did something amazing." Mara went back to working on her rifle. "I did what I had to do. That shot, 2,800 meters with changing winds. Vance said his spotters are still trying to understand how you adjusted for everything. Math and patience, sir. It is the same as any other shot." Hale stopped a few feet from her and watched her work. "He also said you fought off 3 enemy soldiers by yourself during the rescue." "2, sir," she corrected. "The third one stayed behind cover." "2, then," Hale said, his voice serious, which made Mara stop what she was doing. "Most soldiers would consider that the highlight of their career. You have been back for 4 hours, and you are cleaning your rifle like it was just another training day." Mara looked him in the eye. "Because that is what it was, sir. Training gets you ready for the real world, and the real world proves the training works. It is a circle. You do not stop just because things got serious." Hale was silent for a second. Then he pulled over a stool and sat across from her. It was a strange thing for a general to do, and it made Mara feel on alert. "Knox, I have to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." "Sir, how long can you continue to do this?" The question just hung in the quiet room. Mara's hand stopped moving on the cleaning rod. "Do what, sir?" "This," Hale said, gesturing to the armory around them. "Hiding here where no one sees you, waiting for a call, going from being invisible to being essential, and then back to invisible again. How long until it finally breaks you?" Mara's face did not change, but you could see a small flicker in her eyes. "Respectfully, sir, it will not break me. This is what I was made to do. Everyone has a breaking point. Then I just have not found mine yet." Hale leaned in closer. "I have seen your psychological reports, even the classified parts. I had to pull a lot of strings just to see them. Do you know what they said? Mara did not reply. They said you have the strongest ability to handle stress they have ever seen, that you deal with terrible events differently than other people, that you can separate your emotions so well that it is almost unnatural. He stopped for a moment. But they also said that kind of control has a price, and eventually you have to pay it. Mara put down the cleaning rod very carefully and calmly. General, with all respect, I appreciate that you are concerned, but I am fine. I have always been fine, and I will stay fine as long as I can do my job without someone trying to figure me out every time I come back from a mission. Hale looked at her for a long time. Then he stood up and nodded slowly. All right, Sergeant. But if that ever changes, if you ever need to talk, or need some help, or just want someone to listen, my door is always open. I understand, sir. Hale started to walk away, but then he stopped. One more thing. The top commanders are thinking about giving you a new assignment. They believe your talents are being wasted in the armory. Mara's jaw tightened just a little. Where? As a trainer, at the Advanced Sniper School. They want you to teach the new generation. For the first time since she had returned, Mara felt a spark of something like anger inside her. I do not want to teach, sir. I know, Hale said. That is why I told them no. Mara looked up, clearly surprised. It was impossible to read the look on Hale's face. You are exactly where you need to be, Knox. Not because you are trying to hide, but because when the call comes, and it will come again, you have to be ready. And you cannot be ready if you are stuck in a classroom explaining wind speeds to young soldiers who will never have to take a shot that truly matters. He was gone before she could say anything back. Mara sat by herself in the armory, looking at the half-finished rifle in her hands. She could feel the importance of his words sinking in. She started cleaning again, slowly and carefully, just like she always did. Her routine was like a suit of armor, and that armor was what kept her safe. 3 days later, the entire base was buzzing with news. A group from Congress was on their way. There were senators, members of the Defense Committee, and top military leaders from Washington, D.C. They wanted to see a big demonstration of what the base could do with air support, ground attacks, and precision shooting. It was a big show to get more money for the next year's budget. And they specifically wanted to see the sniper who had made the impossible shot. Mara found out from Captain Morris, who came to the armory looking nervous and apologetic. Sergeant Knox, I have to tell you that you have been personally asked to be part of the demonstration. Mara did not even look up from the rifle scope she was adjusting. Who asked for me? Senator Carver. He is the head of the Armed Services Committee. It seems he read the secret report on the embassy rescue and wants to see what America's most lethal sniper looks like in action. Morris seemed embarrassed. Those were his words, not mine. Tell him no, Mara said. Morris shifted his feet nervously. I cannot do that, Sergeant. This order came from the Secretary of Defense. It is not a request. Mara lowered her scope, her hands steady and deliberate. She looked at her captain and said, I am not a performer. I do not shoot for an audience. He sighed. I know, Mara, but this is much bigger than us. This is about funding for the next generation of sniper systems. He pleaded with his eyes. Your demonstration could secure equipment that will save lives. Mara's gaze turned to ice. Or it turns my profession into a circus act and cheapens everything I have worked for. Morris had no reply. She stood up and grabbed her rifle case. Tomorrow. 1,400 hours. Extended range. Mara walked right past him without another look, leaving him in the armory feeling like he had just condemned his best soldier. That night, Mara found no sleep. She lay awake in her bunk, staring at the ceiling. She listened to the familiar night sounds of the base. There were distant voices, the hum of truck engines, and the rattle of the perimeter fence in the wind. Her mind raced, playing out different scenarios. She thought about the demonstration, the intense scrutiny, and the questions about secret missions she could never answer. She hated being forced to perform, as if her skill was a light switch she could just turn on. It was a discipline that had taken her 11 years to perfect. But she also understood the game. The military was fueled by politics just as much as it was by bullets, and sometimes a soldier had to become a symbol, whether they liked it or not. At 500 hours, she finally gave up on sleep and headed to the range. In the gray light before dawn, the entire facility was empty and silent. Mara began her ritual, a process that calmed her mind. She assembled her rifle, checked her ammunition, and calculated the range. She placed targets at 1,000, 1,500, and 2,000 meters. Then, she settled into her position and began to shoot. Every shot felt like a form of meditation. Breathe in, breathe out, squeeze the trigger, and follow through. The powerful kick of the rifle became a steady, reassuring heartbeat. She kept firing until the sun was fully up, until her shoulder ached, and until the rhythm of her work silenced all her worries. When she was done, every target had a group of holes so tight they looked like one single tear in the paper. She was ready. She only wished she did not have to be. The demonstration started exactly at 1400 hours. The viewing platform was crowded with important people. There were senators in expensive suits, generals with chests full of medals, and defense contractors with watchful eyes. Cameras were lined up, and journalists were busy taking notes. A large screen was set up to show a live feed of the targets. Mara arrived in her gear, holding her rifle case, her face showing no emotion. She ignored the stares and whispers. She saw Senator Carver lean over to his aide and say something that made them both smirk. General Hale stood off to the side, his arms crossed. Their eyes met for a moment. He gave her a slight nod, and she returned it. The range officer stepped up to a microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, today you will see a live-fire demonstration of advanced marksmanship." His voice echoed across the range. Staff Sergeant Mara Knox will engage targets at extreme distances with a Barrett M82A1 rifle. Please remain behind the yellow line for your safety. A wave of polite applause followed. Mara walked to the firing platform, ignoring them all. She placed her case down, opened it, and began putting her rifle together with practiced calm. Senator Carver's voice suddenly cut through the air. "Sergeant Knox, could you tell us what makes you so qualified for this?" Mara did not even look up from her work. "Training, sir. Experience and discipline," the senator pressed on. "I understand you had a confirmed kill on a recent mission at nearly 3,000 meters. Is that correct?" Mara's hands stopped for just a split second before she continued her work. "I cannot discuss classified operations, sir." Carver smiled a smug, political smile. He already knew how this would end. "Of course, but just hypothetically, could you make a shot like that for us today?" The entire platform fell silent. Mara finished attaching her scope, then stood up and faced the senator directly. "Hypothetically, sir, if the conditions were right and it was necessary, yes." The senator's smile widened. "Then let's see it." Mara's eyes narrowed. "Sir," Carver waved his hand toward the desert range. "Our farthest target is at 2,000 meters, correct? Let's make this more interesting. Double it." The range officer quickly stepped in. "Senator, our targets are not set up beyond 2,500 meters. The range is not prepared for that." Carver just waved a dismissive hand. "Then put one out there. Use a truck, a barrel, anything. I want to see if these reports are true or if we are wasting our money." Mara felt every single pair of eyes on her. She knew this was not a test of her skill. It was a test of her willingness to obey and put on a show. General Hale's voice cut through the tension. "Senator, that is an unreasonable demand. The environmental conditions are not right," the general continued. "We have not had time to survey that area for safety. Carver smoothly cut him off. I appreciate your concern, General, but we are here to see what our soldiers can do. If Sergeant Knox cannot perform under pressure, I need to know that before we approve billions for these programs. His words were a direct challenge, thrown right at Mara's feet. She knew she could refuse, and probably should. This was not a real mission. It was political theater. But refusing would create doubt about her abilities, and could lead to budget cuts that would hurt good soldiers. Mara looked over at General Hale. He gave a tiny shake of his head, silently telling her to walk away. Then she looked out at the vast desert, instantly calculating the wind, the distance, and the sun's angle. 4,000 meters, she said, her voice quiet but firm. The platform buzzed with whispers. Carver's smile grew even wider. I'm sorry, what was that? Mara turned to face him fully. You want to see what I can do, Senator? Set a target at 4,000 meters. I will hit it. The range officer looked like he was about to faint. Sergeant, that is almost 2.5 miles. No one has ever made a shot like that in training. Mara's voice was calm, but sharp as steel. I am aware of the variables, Sergeant Major. Set the target. I will handle the rest. Carver's expression changed from surprise to a kind of hungry excitement. You are serious about this? I do not make jokes about my job, sir. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then, Carver nodded to his aide. Make it happen. It took them 90 minutes to prepare the shot. A truck drove an old Humvee out to the 4,000-meter line and placed it sideways. They painted a 2-foot orange square on the door. Then, the truck drove away, leaving the vehicle shimmering in the desert heat. Through her scope, the Humvee looked like a tiny toy. Mara lay flat on the platform, her breathing steady. The crowd of VIPs was now completely silent. Everyone knew they were about to see either a miracle or a spectacular failure. Samuels, her trusted spotter, lay beside her. His voice was a low whisper, just for her. Mara, you do not have to do this. Carver is just playing games with you. Walk away. She answered quietly, I cannot. Not anymore. Why not? He asked. Because if I walk away, they will say I could not do it. Then, the next time a soldier's life depends on an impossible shot, they will not even try. They will just assume it cannot be done. Samuels was quiet for a moment. Then he focused his own scope. All right, the wind is shifting. It's between 8 and 15 knots from the west. The temperature is 94 degrees, with 12% humidity. The heat haze is heavy, so it will distort your view. Mara made tiny adjustments to her scope. The bullet would drop nearly 80 feet and take almost 6 seconds to reach the target. The Earth's rotation and the wind would push the bullet off course. She had to calculate everything perfectly. Range confirmed at 4,012 meters, Samuel said. The target is stable. Mara's breathing slowed down. Her heartbeat settled into a calm rhythm she had mastered over years of training. The world shrank until it was only the orange square in her scope, impossibly small and far away. She waited. The minutes ticked by. The VIPs began to shift in their seats. Someone coughed. A camera shutter clicked. Mara blocked it all out. She was waiting for the perfect moment, that tiny window when the wind, heat, and trajectory all lined up perfectly. Hesitation would mean failure. 10 minutes passed, then 15. Senator Carver's impatient voice drifted over. How much longer is this going to? A deafening crack from the rifle shattered the silence. The recoil slammed into her shoulder, and the muzzle blast kicked up a cloud of dust. Then there was stillness. Samuels counted quietly. 3, 4, 5, 6. Everyone held their breath. Then his voice came, sharp and clear. Impact. The confirmation came over the radio from the downrange team. Confirmed. Impact on target. I repeat, hit on target. The platform exploded with noise. There were gasps and shouts. Someone started clapping, and then everyone joined in. On the large monitor, everyone could see the orange square. In the very center was a fresh, ragged hole where the .50 caliber round had punched straight through the steel door. 4,012 meters. One shot, dead center. Senator Carver stood completely still, his mouth hanging open as he stared at the screen in disbelief. General Hale's face showed a mix of pride and worry, and Mara, she just lay there, breathing slowly, looking through her scope at the hole she had made, feeling the cold, hard satisfaction of a job well done. The shot itself was meaningless. So was the applause. What truly mattered was the secret she had guarded for years was now public. She was not just talented, she was unique, and now everyone was aware. The scene turned to chaos. Reporters crowded in, their questions flying. Defense contractors cornered her superiors, discussing contracts and money. The senator, once a doubter, was now a supporter, already preparing speeches about her skill. Mara simply packed her rifle, tuning out the noise. She focused only on the familiar ritual of taking it apart. Samuels stood beside her, his eyes wide with disbelief. He just looked at her, unable to speak. She did not answer. He continued, 4,000 meters, even in practice. Do you realize what you have done? You have completely rewritten the history books. I just needed to prove a point, Mara said softly. That is all. That is all? Samuels let out a half laugh. You just... Mara's voice was sharp, cutting through his excitement. It was a practice shot, with plenty of time to set up. It is nothing like doing it for real. Samuels went quiet. Mara finished packing her case, then stood and put the strap over her shoulder. She felt their stares from all around her, as if they were measuring her, valuing her. She despised it. General Hale stopped her before she could walk away. They found a quiet spot away from the others, by a small equipment building. Hale was the first to speak. That was either the most courageous act I have ever witnessed or the most foolish. It had to be done, sir. Did it? Or did you let them provoke you into showing off a skill you did not need to reveal? Mara looked directly at him. If I had said no, they would have thought I could not do it. The mission in Carzone would be seen as a lucky accident, and the next time a miracle is needed, nobody will believe it can happen. So you made yourself a bullseye instead. I made it so they could not deny my skill. Hale paused for a moment, then let out a deep breath. You understand what is coming next, right? He asked. Every politician, every contractor, and every reporter will want a part of you. They will drag you to meetings, demonstrations, and interviews. They will make you a poster child. I will not allow it. You will not get a choice. Mara's jaw set firmly. Then I will disobey orders, and they will move you to a new post, or even court-martial you, Hale explained. Knox, you have just become the military's most valuable piece of propaganda. They are not going to let you fade back into the background. The truth of his words felt like a heavy weight upon her. Mara gazed out at the desert, at the target 4,000 meters away, with a perfect hole in its center. What would you do, sir? She asked in a low voice. If you were in my position. Hale thought about her question for a moment. Then he answered quietly, I would remember the reason I took that shot. It was not for them. It was for the mission. It was for the people who counted on me to do the impossible. He paused. And I would make certain that remains the only thing that counts, no matter what they try to do next. Mara gave a slow nod. They were both quiet for another moment. Then Hale started to walk away, but stopped one last time. For the record, Knox, that was the single most incredible thing I have ever seen, and I have seen a lot. Thank you, sir. He was gone. Mara stood alone, feeling the hot sun on her, hearing the distant cheers from the viewing area. 4,000 meters, one shot, and her entire life was different. She grabbed her rifle case and headed for the barracks. She felt like a ghost moving across the base, unseen despite all the attention, because some facts do not need to be announced. They only need to be proven. And she had just proven hers. Her orders came at 600 hours the next morning. A military policeman delivered them, looking like he wished he was somewhere else. Staff Sergeant Knox, you are to report to General Hale's office right away. Mara had been up for 2 hours, running in the early morning dark. She was trying to outrun the feeling that her life was spinning out of her control. She had already showered and was on her second coffee when she heard the knock. She got to Hale's office 7 minutes later. The general was at his desk, and he was not by himself. Colonel Greer, the officer who had supported her weeks before, was there. Next to him was a woman Mara had never seen. She looked to be in her mid-50s, dressed in civilian attire, with sharp eyes that watched every move. Hale pointed to an empty chair. "Sit down." Mara sat, her back perfectly straight. She looked at each of them, sensing the serious mood in the room. "Sergeant Knox," Hale started, "this is Dr. Ellen Reyes. She is a consultant for the Department of Defense. She gives advice on how to use our most valuable assets." Reyes offered a small, cold smile. "Simply put, I help figure out where unique skills can be used best." Mara felt her jaw tighten just a little. "Ma'am?" Reyes took out a tablet and began to swipe through information. "Your performance yesterday caused a lot of excitement. The footage is now classified, but the senators who were there saw plenty. They are calling you a strategic weapon, the kind of skill that can change everything." "I am a soldier, ma'am, not a weapon." "You are both," Reyes stated plainly. "And at this moment, very important people are deciding on the best way to utilize you." Mara turned to Hale. "Sir, may I speak honestly?" "Go ahead. I do not want to be utilized. I just want to continue doing my job as I always have." Greer spoke up, leaning in. "Knox, your job is different now. Whether you like it or not, when you made that shot, you put yourself on the map. And assets on the map get used in new ways. Then take me off the map again." "That is impossible," Reyes said. "Too many people witnessed it. Too many videos were made. The secret is out, Sergeant." Mara felt a cold dread spread through her. "So, what is the plan?" Hale looked at Greer, then answered. "Command wants to activate you for full-time special assignments. You will be removed from your current duties and placed in a dedicated special operations unit. You will train with our top Tier 1 teams and go on important missions. Your work will be highly classified, but your skills will be ready when needed." "And if I say no?" The room became very quiet. Reyes put her tablet down. "Then you will be transferred to a teaching position. You will spend the next 5 years showing new recruits the basics of shooting. Your abilities will fade. Your importance will disappear. And when the next impossible mission comes up, someone else will go, and they will fail, all because you were not there." The words hit her hard. Mara kept her breathing steady, but her hands clenched together in her lap. "So you are telling me I have no choice?" "You always have a choice," Hale said softly. "But every choice has a consequence. Your choice right now is to accept who you are, or to spend the rest of your service pretending to be something you are not." Mara looked at her own hands. They were clean and perfectly still, the same hands that had just sent a round through a target over 2 miles away. The same hands that had saved 16 people in Carzone. The hands that she used to care for her rifle every single night. "How much time do I have to think about it?" she asked. 72 hours, Reyes replied. "After that time, the official orders will be issued, one way or another." Mara got to her feet. "Then I will give you my answer in 72 hours, ma'am." She saluted and walked out before they could say anything more. She did not return to her post. Instead, Mara found herself walking along the edge of the base. lost in thought, trying to sort through her options. The sun got higher, and the air grew hotter, making the whole base seem like a dream. Accepting the offer meant she would become a weapon, a tool to be used and then put away. She would have no control, no peace, and no normal life. But saying no meant she would be useless. She would have to watch from the sidelines when her skills could have made a difference. She would be choosing her own comfort over her duty. Neither path felt like the right one. She was still walking when she heard someone running up behind her. She turned and saw Samuels trying to catch his breath. "Mara, hold on." She came to a stop and waited for him. Samuels reached her, bent over, and tried to breathe. "I heard about the meeting," he said between breaths. "About the choice they gave you. News gets around quickly. On a base this small, it always does." He stood up straight and met her gaze. "If you want my opinion, I believe you should accept it. The special operations job." Mara's face showed no emotion. "And why is that?" "Because I know what you are capable of, and I know what happens when people with your kind of talent decide to walk away from it." He took a breath. "My father was a helicopter pilot in Iraq. He was the absolute best, but he grew tired of the fighting and the stress. So he asked for a transfer to a training position. He spent the following 8 years teaching others how to fly, and he was completely unhappy. Every night, he would talk about the missions he should have been on. He talked about the people he could have helped if he had just stayed in the action." Samuels's voice grew softer. "He passed away 3 years ago from a heart attack, and I truly believe that a part of him died from the regret of not doing what he was born to do." Mara stayed silent for a while. Finally, she asked, "What if the thing I am born to do gets me killed? Then you would die for a real reason," he answered, instead of slowly fading away in a classroom, talking about things most people will never truly face. The weight of his words filled the space between them. Samuels looked uneasy. "Listen, I do not have the right answer for you. I am certain that when you made that shot yesterday, it was more than just talent. It felt like you were fulfilling your destiny. And to see you give that up would be like watching someone put out a fire that the world desperately needs." Mara looked at him for a second before giving a single nod. "Thank you, Lieutenant." "For what?" he asked. "For telling me the truth." She turned and walked away, leaving Samuel standing there in the sunlight, watching her disappear. Later that night, Mara was alone in her room. She stared at a folder that she had kept locked away for many years. It held all of her old records. It had her recruitment papers, her psychological tests, and the secret reports that marked her as a perfect soldier for extremely dangerous and precise missions. She was only 19 years old when they chose her from basic training. A drill sergeant had seen something special in her. It was not her scores on the shooting range, which were decent but not amazing. He saw how she handled pressure, how she remained peaceful when everyone else was afraid. He noticed she could figure out angles and distances in her head during combat drills. He wrote about it in a report. That report ended up in the hands of someone at the Joint Special Operations Command. 3 weeks after that, Mara was in a room with no windows, talking to 2 officers. They asked her only one thing. "How would you feel about doing things that most people think are impossible?" She gave them a truthful answer. "I'm not sure if they are impossible. I just know that I want to try." 6 months after that, she was part of a secret training program that did not officially exist. She learned about the science of bullets from physicists. She studied weather patterns with people who used to chase tornadoes. She learned to control her breathing from Olympic marksmen. She was building the skills that would allow her to do what nobody else could. They shaped her, polished her, and made her into a one-of-a-kind weapon. And then they told her to hide. An asset like her was too precious to be risked in normal combat. They said she would only be called upon when it was absolutely required. When the impossible had to be done, she accepted it. She even liked the idea of waiting, of being patient, of staying ready without anyone knowing who she was. But the mission yesterday had changed everything. Now, she had to figure out if she ever really had a choice in her life, or if that choice was made for her 11 years ago in that room without windows. Mara put the folder back in its place, locked it up, and lay down on her bed. Outside her window, the military base was quieting down for the night. Inside, Mara just stared at the ceiling. She wondered if she was ever truly invisible, or if she was just waiting for someone to give her the permission to be seen. The following morning, she saw General Hale in the dining hall. He was sitting by himself with a cup of coffee and a newspaper he was not actually reading. Mara walked up to his table and stood straight until he noticed her. "Knox," he said, "have a seat." She took a seat and placed her hands on the table. "Sir, I have a question for you, and I need a completely honest answer." "I am always honest," he replied. "Did you already know who I was when you first saw me? Back when you were questioning me in the armory, did you know what I could do?" Hale put his coffee cup down. "I knew you were different. I just did not know how different until I tried to look at your service record. And now, after what you did, I know that you are the most dangerous weapon I have ever come across, and I do not say that to flatter you." Mara blinked in surprise. "Sir?" Hale leaned closer and spoke in a quiet voice. "Weapons are just tools, Knox. They do not have thoughts or feelings. They just do what they are made to do. And at this moment, some very powerful people want to make you into that. A tool they can just point and shoot whenever they want. And you believe I should say no? I believe you should know exactly what you are getting into before you say yes." He stopped for a moment. "I know what happens to soldiers who become famous. The burden of high expectations, the constant demand to succeed, and the loss of personal freedom. It can destroy some of them, and it turns others into something they are not. Only a very small number make it through without being broken. But a few do," she said. "A few do," Hale confirmed. "They are the ones who never forget their original reason for joining. They hold on to their purpose even when the whole world loses sight of it." Mara sat silently for a second. "What was your purpose, sir, when you first joined?" A small smile appeared on Hale's face. "I wanted to be a leader who could make choices that would save my soldiers' lives. I wanted to be an officer who knew that every command I gave had a real-life cost." He took a breath. "At some point, I became very good at my job. I started getting promotions. I began attending meetings instead of leading soldiers. I started making choices based on politics instead of what was right for my people. Do you have any regrets?" "Every single day," Hale said softly. "But I also understand that the choices I make today, even the political ones, still save soldiers' lives, just in a different way." He lifted his coffee, drank some, and then placed it back down. "Knox, no matter what you choose, be sure it is your own choice. Not their choice, not my choice, but yours, because you are the person who has to live with the outcome." Mara nodded her head slowly. "Thank you, sir." She got up to go. "Knox," he called out. She looked back at him. "For what it is worth, I believe you are much more than what they want you to be, and I truly hope you never forget that." 48 hours later, Mara went to General Hale's office to give him her final decision. Hale was seated at his desk. Greer was in the same chair he sat in before. Dr. Reyes was gone, and in his place was another official, a man named Harris. He looked like the kind of person who saw success only in numbers and charts. "Sergeant Knox," Hale said in a formal tone, "have you made a choice?" Mara stood perfectly straight, her eyes fixed forward. "I have, sir. I will take the special operations job, but I have some conditions." Harris looked annoyed. "Soldiers are not in a position to make demands, Sergeant." "I am not making demands," Mara replied calmly. "I am explaining the rules that will allow me to perform at my very best." Greer showed a hint of a smile. "Please continue." Mara took a folded sheet of paper out of her pocket and placed it on the general's desk. First, I will have the final say on whether I accept a mission. If I believe a shot is not smart or is too dangerous, I can say no without facing any punishment. Second, there will be no public events, no interviews with the press, and no visits from politicians. I either work completely in secret, or I do not work for you at all. Third, I will keep my current rank and salary. I do not want any promotions that are based on fame or politics. Harris glared at the paper as if it had insulted him personally. This is completely out of the ordinary. So is making a shot from 4,000 meters away, Mara shot back. You are asking for extraordinary skills. So you have to accept extraordinary rules. Hale looked over the list of conditions, his face showing no emotion. He then turned to Greer. Colonel. Greer gave a nod. I can agree to this. The success of our missions is what matters, not getting attention. As long as she produces results, the High Command will not be concerned with anything else. Harris still did not seem convinced. And what if she turns down a mission that we believe is vital? Then you will have to find another person, Mara said plainly. You have other snipers and other choices. But if you want me to do the job, then you have to understand that I am not a gun you can just fire whenever you want. I am a tool of great precision, and that precision demands careful judgment. The office was quiet. Then, General Hale took a pen and put his signature on the paper. It is approved. Greer, prepare the official orders. Harris, tell command that my terms are not up for debate. For a moment, Harris looked like he would argue, but he chose silence instead. He gave a stiff nod and walked out. Greer rose to his feet and offered his hand to Mara. Welcome aboard, Sergeant. You have integration training at Fort Bragg in 2 weeks. Mara accepted his handshake. I understand, sir. After Greer departed, the door clicked shut behind him. Mara was left alone with Hale, feeling the immense gravity of her decision settled deep inside her. Hale tilted his chair back. They will definitely fight you on those terms and try to wear you down. I am aware. You will have to defend your position every single day. I know that as well. Hale watched her closely for a long moment before speaking. So why did you agree to this? Mara looked directly into his eyes. Because Lieutenant Samuels was correct. Pretending I am not what I am does not make me less of a threat. It only makes me ineffective, and I would rather be useful and dangerous than safe and forgotten. Hale gave a slow, deliberate nod. That is the most truthful statement I have heard this entire week. He got up and walked around the desk. Mara half expected a salute from him, but he simply offered his hand. Good luck to you, Knox. Always remember, you are a soldier, no matter what. Not a tool, not an icon, but a soldier. Never let them tell you anything different. Mara shook his hand, feeling the solidness of his grip and the conviction in his gaze. I will not, sir. She spent her final 2 weeks at Ironcliff, wrapping up all of her duties. The armory needed to be transferred to her replacement, a young specialist who seemed completely overwhelmed by the job. Mara had spent months perfecting the calibration of those weapons. She patiently guided him through every single procedure, ensuring a smooth and flawless transition. She patrolled the perimeter one last time, committing to memory the feeling of the base beneath her feet. She inhaled the familiar scent of diesel and dust and listened to the synchronized rhythm of marching formations. In the small corner that had been her own for 8 months, she cleaned her rifle a final time, wiping every part and checking every measurement, getting ready for the next chapter. General Hale discovered her in that corner on her last night. I had a feeling I would find you here, he said, resting against the doorframe. Mara glanced up from the barrel she was inspecting. Old habits are hard to break, sir. The good ones should never be broken. He stepped into the room, his hands held behind his back. I received a message from Bragg. Your new team is the absolute best. Delta Force operators, SEAL snipers, and agency contractors. You will be among the most elite. That is good. I prefer working with people who get what I do, not people who just want to observe. A faint smile appeared on Hale's face. You are going to fit in better than you imagine. He paused, then took a small, worn leather case from his pocket. He placed a dark case on the workbench right beside Mara's rifle. What is this? She asked. Open it, he said. Mara unclasped the case. Inside lay a single medal, the Distinguished Service Cross. It was not new. The ribbon was faded, and the medal was slightly tarnished around the edges. That was mine, Hale said softly. From Afghanistan, 2003. I made a call that saved my platoon, but broke about 6 different rules of engagement. They gave me that medal and a formal reprimand in the very same week. Mara looked up at him, her expression puzzled. I am not giving it to you for what you have done, Hale went on. I am giving it to you to remember something. The medals are not important. The recognition is not important. What matters is the people you save and the principles you uphold. Everything else is just noise. Mara stared at the medal, feeling its true weight. It was not the medal, but what it stood for. It was trust, respect, and a deep understanding. Sir, I cannot accept this. You already have. Consider it an order, he said with a small smile. Besides, I have a feeling you will earn your own very soon. You might as well have one to compare it with. Mara closed the case gently and set it beside her rifle. Thank you, sir. Hale gave a slight nod. Then his posture became formal again. Sergeant Knox, it has been an honor serving with you. Give them hell at Bragg. I will, sir. He turned and left. Mara sat alone in the armory one last time, surrounded by the tools of her work, holding a medal she had not earned but would carry with her always. Some gifts were not about what you had done in the past, they were about the person you were trusted to become. Her orders said the transport would leave at 600. Mara loaded her things into the back of a plain truck. There was a rifle case, a duffel bag, and a footlocker with everything that mattered to her. The driver was a civilian contractor who did not ask questions or make small talk. He was perfect. As the truck drove through the gates, Mara glanced back one final time. The Ironcliff base was quiet in the early morning light. You could see formations of soldiers running and vehicles heading to the motor pool. The rhythm of daily life continued on without her. She had been a ghost there, safe and protected by the routine. But that part of her life was now over. Now was the time for her to step into the light, but on her own terms and under her conditions. She carried the weight of what she had proven and the responsibility that came with it. The truck turned onto the highway, and the base vanished behind a cluster of desert hills. Mara leaned back in her seat, closed her eyes, and let the feelings wash over her. There was fear, there was anticipation, and there was the certainty that her entire world had just changed. When she opened her eyes again, the fear was gone. All that was left was purpose, because Mara Knox was not chasing glory or recognition. She was running toward the moment when someone would need the impossible. And when that moment arrived, when lives were on the line and failure was not an option, she would be ready. Quiet, precise, and undeniable, just as she had always been. The truck continued on through the desert, taking her toward a future she could not see but was already committed to. And somewhere in the distance, a target was waiting. She just did not know it yet. Fort Bragg hit her like a wall of humidity and pure focus. The truck dropped Mara at the main gate just after 1400 hours. The base was huge, stretching across thousands of acres. It was home to Special Operations Command, Delta Force, and units whose names never appeared on any official list. The air smelled of pine trees and gunpowder, and every soldier she passed moved with the kind of intense focus that comes from knowing your next mission could be just hours away. A captain met her at the processing center. He was young, fit, and had eyes that had seen combat and had not flinched. Staff Sergeant Knox? Yes, sir. Captain Reeves. I'm your liaison for integration. Follow me. They walked through the base in silence, passing training areas that looked more like movie sets than military grounds. There were special houses for close-quarters combat, firing ranges that stretched to the horizon, and helicopter pads where large aircraft sat ready to fly. Reeves led her to a plain building, marked only with a number. Inside, the temperature dropped 10 degrees. It was a secure facility with soundproofed walls, the kind of place where secret conversations happened every single day. He stopped in front of a conference room door. Your team is waiting. They have been briefed on your skills. Most of them are doubtful. Prove them wrong. I do not need to prove anything, sir. Reeves offered a faint smile. Good answer. He opened the door. 6 faces turned toward her. 5 men and 1 woman. They all looked as if they were carved from granite and stress. These were operators. The real deal. A man at the head of the table stood up. He was in his mid-40s with a scarred jaw and eyes like flint. Sergeant Knox, I am Master Sergeant Torres. I run this unit. Take a seat. Mara sat down, placing her rifle case on the floor next to her chair. Torres pointed around the table. These are your teammates. Hernandez, a close protection specialist. Kim is our communications and intelligence expert. Vega handles explosives and breaching. Martinez is the combat medic, and then there is Collins. She manages overwatch and tactical coordination. Each operator acknowledged their name with a nod. There were no smiles and no words. Torres sat back down. We have seen your file, at least the parts that were not blacked out. You have made some incredible shots. It is an impressive history. But we need to get one thing straight. This is not a one-person show. You do not fire without coordination. You do not make decisions without the team. Do you understand? Mara looked him squarely in the eye. I understand, but I also will not take a shot that I am not certain I can make. If the situation does not match my abilities, I will speak up. Hernandez, a broad man with arms like tree trunks, let out a scoff. Are you suggesting you know better than the commander of the mission? I am saying I understand my own capabilities, and I will not lie about them to make someone else feel at ease. The room fell silent. Collins, the other woman on the team, who was lean with intense eyes, leaned in. Good. The last sniper we had took any shot, command ordered. That mistake cost 2 hostages their lives in Yemen because he refused to admit the angle was bad. Torres nodded slowly. Trust is how we operate here, Knox. You trust us to position you and keep you safe. In return, we trust you to tell us what is possible and what is just a foolish risk. Can you handle that? Yes, Sergeant. In that case, welcome to Task Force Wraith. We deploy in 3 days. Your training starts now. Let's go. The next 72 hours were the most grueling of Mara's entire career. They put her through scenarios that made her previous training seem like basic exercises. There was hostage rescue in city environments, target interception during active firefights, and counter-sniper missions against skilled enemies. Every drill pushed her to the very edge of her abilities and then pushed her even further. But she never broke. On the second day, Torres put her in a simulation. She was on a rooftop providing overwatch while the team assaulted a building 300 meters away. There were enemy snipers in high positions, civilians walking in the streets, and a target that had to be eliminated before the team went in, or they would all die. Mara spotted the hostile sniper in 8 seconds. She calculated the shot in 12 seconds and fired at 18 seconds. The simulator confirmed a clean kill. Torres reviewed the recording afterward with his arms crossed. How did you spot him so quickly? His shadow was inconsistent. Everyone else on that rooftop was casting shadows that matched the sun's angle. His was off by 3 degrees. It meant he was using artificial cover. Kim let out a low whistle. That is good. That is scary good, Vega corrected. She just outsmarted a computer simulation. Mara did not say anything. She was already storing the lesson away, Artificial cover creates tiny tells. She had to remember that. On the third day, they gave her the real test. It was a live fire exercise with actual targets. Old vehicles were placed at ranges from 800 to 2,400 meters. The wind was unpredictable, and time was short. The team moved through a simulated combat zone while Mara provided cover from a high ridgeline. She took 11 shots in 30 minutes. 10 of them were hits. She had one miss when a gust of wind shifted halfway through the bullet's flight. When it was all over, Torres climbed up to her position, breathing heavily from the climb. "That miss," he said. "What happened?" There was wind shear. A thermal layer shifted. I did not adjust for it fast enough. "What would you do differently?" "I would wait 3 more seconds. Let the gust die down. Then take the shot in the calm window." Torres nodded. "And if 3 seconds meant the team died?" Mara met his eyes. "Then I would take the shot and accept the odds, but I would rather wait and guarantee the hit." Torres watched her for a long moment. Then he held out his hand. "You will do, Knox. You will do just fine." She shook it, feeling the calluses, the strength, and the approval in his grip. For the first time since she had arrived, she felt like she truly belonged here. The deployment came sooner than they expected. Just 18 hours after the final training exercise, the team was on a C-17 aircraft heading east. The destination was classified. The mission was classified. The only thing Mara knew for sure was that lives were in danger, and her rifle was needed. The briefing took place during the flight. Torres stood at the front of the cargo bay, holding a tablet, his expression serious. "Intelligence has located a high-value target, Ahmad Kassier. He is the logistics coordinator for a network responsible for attacks in 3 different countries. He is hiding in a compound in the Wakhan corridor. It is mountainous and remote. There will be no air support because of political issues. A ground assault is not an option. The approach is filled with mines and the compound is heavily fortified." He brought up a satellite image. "Kassier moves between buildings on a predictable schedule. At 600 local time, he crosses from the main house to a second building about 40 meters away. It is a 15-second window. That is our chance to take the shot." Mara studied the image. The range was 3,100 meters. The elevation difference was 400 meters. The wind was unpredictable, up to 20 knots. Hernandez shook his head. "That is completely insane." "That is why Knox is here," Torres said without emotion. He looked straight at Mara. "Can you make that shot?" The shot was a nightmare. A complex puzzle where every piece had to fit perfectly. "I can do it," she promised, "but I need at least 6 hours on site before the window opens." "You have 8, came the reply. "We go in tonight, reach the firing spot in the dark, and we wait for the sun." The team looked at each other, but no one argued. Torres laid out the rules. "We need a positive identification on Kassier. 0 collateral damage, and you get 1 shot. If you miss, he will vanish for months, maybe even years." That pressure felt heavy in the air. Mara gave a single nod. "I understand." They flew in at midnight, sliding down ropes from a Blackhawk into a landscape that seemed alien. It was all sharp peaks and fields of boulders, with air so thin every breath felt like half a lungful. The team moved without a sound, using only hand signals and night vision, placing every foot with care. Mara's pack was heavy with her rifle case, weather sensors, ballistic computers, and enough rounds for a dozen shots she prayed she would not have to fire. The ascent lasted 4 hours. When they finally got to the firing position, a ledge of rock overlooking the valley, Kassier's compound looked like a modern fortress. Mara's legs were on fire and her lungs ached, but her hands were perfectly still. Collins secured the area while Mara started her work. She put her rifle together with practiced calm, then set up her tools. One to measure the wind, another to check the temperature, humidity, and air pressure. Her laser rangefinder, gave the distance as 3,127 meters. The elevation drop was 412 meters. The wind blew at 14 knots, with gusts up to 18. It kept shifting its direction unpredictably. Mara did the math in her head, then double-checked it with her ballistics computer. The bullet would fall nearly 90 feet on its journey. The wind would push it sideways in different directions as it flew. The flight time would be almost 7 seconds, which feels like forever in this line of work. Torres kneeled next to her. "What does it look like?" "Difficult," she said. "The valley is causing swirling air currents. The wind is not stable. Can you still make it?" Mara was silent for 3 seconds before she nodded. "Yes, but I have to wait for the wind to settle down. If I fire during a gust, the chance of missing becomes too high. How long will that take?" "As long as it takes," she replied. Torres trusted her. "We have you covered. Take all the time you need." He backed away, leaving her alone with her rifle in the fading darkness. She lay down, getting into position with the rifle resting on its supports. Her cheek fit perfectly against the stock. Her eye was the right distance from the scope. Her body was straight behind the weapon to absorb the kick. And then she began to wait. The sky slowly turned from black to a deep purple, then to the pale blue just before sunrise. The stars disappeared. The valley below slowly took shape, like an old photograph coming to life. At 05:45, lights flickered on inside the compound. People were moving between the buildings, starting their day. At 05:55, a door opened at the main house. Mara's heartbeat remained slow and steady. She had been controlling her breathing for the last hour, keeping herself calm. Through her scope, she saw a man step into the open. He was tall with a beard, and he walked with the kind of confidence that said he felt untouchable. Kim's voice came over the radio, a soft whisper. "The facial scan confirms it is Kassir." Mara kept him in her sights. He stopped to speak with a guard, then started walking to another building. Her 15-second opportunity had just started. Mara's finger touched the trigger. Not squeezing, just making contact as she waited. For the last 30 minutes, the wind had been wild and unpredictable. But in that exact moment, everything went still. The flags on the compound walls stopped flapping. The dust on the ground settled. Mara let out half a breath and held the rest. Her entire world became the view through her scope. It was just Kassir's outline and the math she had reviewed 100 times in her mind. Aim half a body length ahead of him. Adjust for the drop. Pray the wind stays calm for 7 seconds. She squeezed the trigger. The rifle's roar broke the silence. The kick pushed hard against her shoulder. The sound bounced across the valley like thunder. 7 seconds. Mara watched through the scope. The bullet followed its invisible path, falling and drifting on a collision course with its target. Kassir took one more step. Then his head jerked back. His body collapsed to the ground. Kim's voice crackled on the radio. "We have an impact. Target is down. I repeat, the target is down." The compound instantly became a scene of chaos. Guards were running and shouting, looking for a shooter they could not possibly see. Torres spoke into his radio. "Time to go." "Move! Move! Move!" The team pulled back from the ridge, staying low and moving quickly away from their position. As she moved, Mara expertly disassembled her rifle, packing each piece away with smooth efficiency. They made it to the extraction point. 40 minutes later, their lungs burning and their legs protesting. The Black Hawk was already on its way, its blades chopping through the thin mountain air. They climbed aboard, and the helicopter turned sharply, flying away from the mountains and leaving the valley far behind. Inside the helicopter, surrounded by her team, Mara rested her rifle case on her lap. She finally allowed herself to take a deep, full breath. Collins leaned in close, yelling over the noise of the rotors. "That was the craziest thing I have ever witnessed. 3,000 meters in that wind!" Mara did not say anything. She just closed her eyes and felt the rush of adrenaline fade away, leaving behind that familiar hollow feeling that always came after a successful mission. The calculation was always simple. The wait was always the hardest part. The debriefing was held in a secure building Mara had never seen before. The leadership was happy. The mission was clean, efficient, and caused no political problems. Cassier's death would cripple his network for months, possibly for years. There was no collateral damage and no international incidents, just a positive outcome. But Mara barely registered the compliments. She just sat there in the room, her mind already shifting to the next mission. There was always a next mission, and another after that. It was a never-ending cycle of impossible shots and intense pressure. Later, Torres found her in the armory, carefully cleaning her rifle. "Are you all right?" he asked her. Mara glanced up from her work. "Yes, Sergeant. You do not look all right." She put down her cleaning tool. "I am just processing it all." "Processing what?" Mara paused for a second before she answered. "This morning, I ended a man's life from 3,000 meters away. He never even saw me coming. He never knew I was there. He had no chance to fight back. And now everyone is acting like I should be getting a prize." Torres sat on a stool across from her. "You did win a prize. They are recommending you for the Silver Star. I do not want it. It does not matter. You deserve it." He paused for a moment. "Knox, do you have any idea what Cassier was responsible for?" Mara did not reply. 17 bombings in 3 different countries. 43 dead civilians. 12 dead soldiers. Countless families torn apart. He planned them all. He paid for them all. And he was planning something even worse. Our intelligence showed he was organizing an attack on a school. Torres leaned closer. "You put a stop to that with a single bullet. It was one perfect, impossible shot that saved more lives than we will ever know. So yes, people are treating you like you won a medal, because you absolutely did." Mara looked directly at him. "Does carrying this weight ever get any easier?" "No," Torres admitted honestly. "It does not. But it does get clearer. You start to understand why it is necessary, and that makes the weight easier to bear." He stood up and put a hand on her shoulder. "Welcome to the Wraiths, Knox. For real this time." He walked away, and Mara sat there alone with her rifle, letting his words sink in. The burden would never feel lighter, but she would continue to carry it. Someone had to. 6 months later, Mara was standing in General Hale's office in the Pentagon. She had been ordered to report in her dress uniform with no other explanation. She had arrived from Fort Bragg that morning, still weary from a mission in North Africa that had just ended 3 days earlier. Hale was sitting behind a large, polished desk that did not seem to fit him at all. It was too neat, too political. "Knox, please sit." She sat down, her back perfectly straight. Hale watched her for a few seconds. "You seem different." "Different in what way, sir?" "You look older. Not in age, but in the weight you carry." Mara said nothing. Hale leaned forward. "I have been going over your mission reports. 7 missions in 6 months, 7 successful outcomes. Not one wasted shot. Not one civilian injury. The higher-ups are calling you the most valuable asset we have in the field. I am just doing my job, sir. Your job is changing our definition of what is possible." He took a breath. "But I did not call you in here for praise. I called because I made you a promise back at Ironcliff. I told you to always remember that you are a soldier, not just a weapon. I need to know if you still believe that is true." Mara was silent for a long time before she finally spoke. "I take shots that end people's lives. I do it from distances that are hard to even imagine. I work in the shadows, unseen and unheard. In many ways, that makes me a weapon." General Hale's face tensed up. "But," Mara continued, "I am a weapon used by people who know the true cost of what I do. Torres always makes sure I understand the reason for each target. Collins always tells me about the lives that are saved. They make sure I never forget that this is not just about numbers. It is about people and their futures. She looked straight into Hale's eyes. So yes, sir, I am still a soldier. Because a soldier knows that violence is not the objective. It is the very last option. And every single time I pull that trigger, I am honoring that truth. Hale leaned back in his chair, and all the tension left his body. Good, he said, his voice steady. That is good. He opened a desk drawer and took out a small, plain box. This is for you, but wait until you are alone to open it. Mara accepted the box, feeling its surprising weight in her hand. Sir, you can trust me. She stood tall, giving a sharp salute. Thank you, sir. At the door, his voice stopped her. You have become everything I hoped. You do the impossible, but you never forget why it matters. Do not let anyone take that away from you. I will not, sir, she promised, and then she was gone. That night, inside her quiet room at Fort Bragg, Mara finally opened the box. It held a single, faded photograph of a young soldier, barely 20. He stood in desert fatigues, his rifle held loosely, smiling with a hope that had not yet seen the true face of war. On the back, in Hale's familiar handwriting, it said, "This was me before I forgot the reason I began. Do not let the burden make you forget yours. R." Mara gazed at the picture for a long time. She then set it on her desk, right next to the leather case holding Hale's Distinguished Service Cross. They were two reminders, two anchors in a storm. She knew she was a weapon. That was a simple truth. But she was a weapon guided by principles, by people who understood the terrible cost, and by a purpose greater than any single mission. As long as she held on to that, the weight was something she could bear. 3 years later, Mara Knox received a summons that she had been both expecting and dreading. The Secretary of Defense himself wanted a private meeting. She walked into his office wearing her formal uniform. The medals she never wanted were pinned neatly on her chest. A silver star, a bronze star with valor, and 3 Army Commendation medals. Every single one was a memory of a shot, a life taken, and a choice that would stay with her for the rest of her days. The secretary, a man with gray hair and the wise eyes of a former general, rose as she entered. Staff Sergeant Knox, I appreciate you coming. Sir, she replied. He pointed to a chair, and they both sat. I was just reviewing your file, he began. 43 confirmed missions and 43 successes. You have saved hundreds of lives, perhaps thousands, if we consider the aftermath. You are a legend in the special operations community. Mara said nothing. But even legends have a limit, the secretary went on. The body weakens, reflexes get slower. Your commander tells me you have been asking for fewer deployments. That is correct, sir, she confirmed. May I ask why? Mara looked directly into his eyes. Because I am not a machine, sir. Every mission costs something, and I have given so much already. I must be careful with what I have left. The secretary gave a slow, understanding nod. A fair answer. So, I am offering you a choice. You can stay with your unit, Wraith, on a lighter schedule, mostly training the next generation, or you can retire right now with full honors and all your benefits. Mara felt a sudden shift inside her. Retire, sir? You have served with honor and gone beyond every expectation. Nobody would blame you for stepping back. Mara was silent for a long moment. She thought of Ironcliff, of Hale's quiet warning, and of the heavy burden she had carried for so many years. Finally, she spoke. What happens to the mission if I leave? Who will take the shots that I would have taken? We will find someone, he said. We always do. But will they make them? The secretary's professional expression softened just a little. Honestly, probably not all of them. You have a rare mix of skill, discipline, and sound judgment. That is not easy to find. Mara nodded very slowly. Then I will stay. Lighter schedule, training role. But when the truly impossible call comes, when lives are hanging by a thread and I am the only one who can make the shot, you call me and I will answer." The secretary smiled. "I was hoping you would say that." He stood up and offered his hand. "Thank you, Sergeant Knox, for your service, for your sacrifice, and for being precisely who this country needed at the most critical times." Mara shook his hand. She felt the full weight of his words, a recognition she had never sought but was finally learning to accept. She left the Pentagon that day and flew back to Fort Bragg. She returned to the team that was her family, and to the rifle that was her voice. And for the first time in a very long time, she felt a quiet that was almost peace. 5 years after that meeting, Staff Sergeant Mara Knox stood on a training field at Fort Bragg. She watched a young soldier, not even 20 years old, try to line up a shot at a target 1,000 meters away. The young man was visibly shaking, nervous, and trying way too hard. Mara walked over and knelt down next to him. "What is going on? I cannot make this shot, Sergeant," he stammered. "The wind keeps changing. The angle feels all wrong." "Then do not take it," she said simply. The kid looked up at her, completely confused. "What? If the shot is not there, you cannot force it. You have to wait for the right moment. You have to trust the process. And if that moment never arrives, you accept it and you move on to your next plan." "But the instructors told us." "The instructors are not the ones with their finger on the trigger," she cut in. "You are. And you are the only one who can truly decide if you are ready." Mara paused. "So, are you?" The kid looked back toward the target and took a deep breath. He settled himself again, waited for a calm in the wind, and then he fired. The target was hit, right in the center. A wide smile spread across the kid's face. Mara patted him on the shoulder. "Excellent. Now do it over and over until it is no longer about luck, but about skill." She stepped away to let the young soldier practice. She felt a deep satisfaction that came not from making the shot herself, but from successfully teaching another. Later that night, she sat in her room, cleaning her rifle one final time before securing it in its case. She was not sent on missions very often anymore. It was maybe once or twice a year when a special call came in that only she could answer. But she was always prepared, because some duties never truly end. Some purposes stay with you until the very end, and Mara Knox was at peace with that reality. It was on a Tuesday when the final mission call arrived. Mara was teaching a class on advanced ballistics when Torres showed up at the door with a serious look on his face. She understood instantly. She dismissed her students, gathered her equipment, and joined Torres in the briefing room. "What is the mission?" Torres displayed satellite photos on the screen. "An American journalist was taken by militants in the Sahel. They are taking her to a place for a public execution. We have a 12-hour window before they broadcast it to the world. A rescue team cannot make it in time, but we have a visual on their convoy. There is one vehicle with 6 hostiles and 1 hostage. They are driving across open desert, which is flat with very little cover." Mara looked closely at the image. The range is 4,200 meters, maybe even more, depending on where they decide to stop. The room became completely silent. 4,200 meters. It was farther than any shot she had ever taken on a mission. It was farther than anyone had ever taken, period. Torres looked straight at her. "Can you make it?" Mara thought of the young soldier she had been training that morning. She thought of the old photograph from Hale on her desk. She thought about every single shot she had ever made and every life that was saved. Then she gave a firm nod. "Get me there. I will make it." They flew in by helicopter at dawn, landing on a high ridge that looked out over the huge, empty desert the convoy had to cross. Mara set up her position with the calm precision of someone who had done this 100 times before. She placed her sensors, calculated all the variables, and prepared for a shot that seemed to defy the very laws of physics. Collins was beside her, focused on the spotting scope. "The wind is vicious," he said. "It is gusting up to 25 knots. The temperature is rising fast. The heat mirage is going to make it nearly impossible to identify the target." "I know, Mara. This is more extreme than anything we have ever tried." Mara did not take her eyes off her own scope. "I know that, too." The convoy finally appeared 2 hours later. It was just a single truck moving slowly across the sand, leaving a trail of dust you could see for miles. Through her scope, Mara could just barely see the people inside. 6 men and 1 woman whose hands were tied. "Range is 4,287 meters, Collins confirmed. She ran the numbers in her head. The bullet would drop over 100 feet. It would be in the air for more than 8 seconds. The wind would push the bullet in 3 different directions as it fell through layers of heat. The space for any error was less than an inch. Collins spoke in a low voice. "We are authorized to engage. When you are ready." Mara settled herself into position. Her breathing slowed down, and her heart rate dropped into the steady rhythm she had spent 15 years perfecting. She waited. The truck continued for another kilometer and then came to a stop. The hostiles got out, pulling the journalist along with them. They were setting up a camera, getting ready for the execution. Mara focused her scope on the leader, the one holding a weapon to the journalist's head. This was the moment, the impossible shot, the one that would either save a life or become a ghost that would haunt her forever. She breathed out halfway. Her entire world became the crosshairs on her scope. It was just the calculation and the single moment when everything came into perfect alignment. She squeezed the trigger. The rifle roared. 8 seconds of complete silence followed. Then, the sound of impact. Collins yelled, "Target is down! Hostile is down!" Through her scope, Mara watched the lead militant fall to the ground. The others panicked and scattered, looking for a threat they could not even imagine. The journalist ran. In just a few minutes, the rescue team, which was positioned nearby but could not move in without Mara's shot, swept in and got her out safely. The mission was a success. Mara lowered her rifle. Her hand was steady. Her breathing was controlled. Collins looked at her, his face filled with awe. I do not even have words for that. Mara did not reply. She just started to disassemble her rifle, pack her gear, and get ready for extraction. The shot was over. The impossible had been made possible one more time, and for her, that was enough. 6 months after that day, Mara Knox officially retired from active service. There was no big ceremony, no speeches. It was just a quiet change from the uniform she had worn for 16 years to a civilian life that felt both unfamiliar and surprisingly peaceful. She moved to Montana, returning to the mountains where she had grown up and to the deep silence she had always missed. She bought a small plot of land with a view that went on for miles. She built a workshop where she could work on rifles and teach the few students who came looking for her. Torres visited her once and brought the whole team. They gathered around a fire, sipping coffee and sharing stories about missions they could never speak of in public. "Do you miss it?" Torres finally asked. Mara looked toward the mountains, at the endless sky and rock. "Sometimes I do, but I did the job I was made for, and now I am doing the job I need to do. That job is living a life free from the constant pressure, free from the waiting." Torres nodded with complete understanding. They remained there until the sun came up, then they left her alone with her thoughts. Mara stood on her porch and watched the sunrise. She felt a sense of completeness she had not experienced in many years. She had been a weapon, a soldier, a symbol, and a legend talked about in whispers, in secure buildings and secret files. But she was more than all of those things. She was someone who knew that true greatness is not about being noticed. It is about being ready when no one else is. It is about achieving the impossible when people's lives are on the line. It was about shouldering a burden so that others would not have to. And now, at long last, she could finally let it go. Not because she was defeated or had failed, but because she had given her absolute all at the exact moment it was needed most. And that was more than enough. Years later, a young soldier showed up at Mara's home. Torres had sent him with a message. The impossible was needed one more time. Mara looked at the soldier and saw a reflection of her younger self in his eyes. Nervous but focused, and carrying a responsibility he did not yet fully grasp. She smiled softly. "Please tell Torres that I am retired." "Ma'am," he said, "you would say that. He also told me to remind you that some callings do not end. They simply wait for the moment they are needed most." Mara stood in silence for a long time. She felt that old, familiar rhythm begin to stir inside her. The focus, the certainty, and the knowledge that someone, somewhere, needed the impossible. She then gave a nod. "Give me 24 hours to get ready. I will be there." The soldier gave a salute and departed. And Mara Knox went into her workshop, opened the case that held her rifle, and started the well-known ritual. Because some burdens you carry forever, not out of obligation, but because when the world needs you, you always answer the call. Never misjudge the quiet people who prepare in the shadows. When a situation demands the impossible, they are the ones who come forward. They deliver the very thing that everyone else believed could not be done.